making the headlines. It's Zibby here, and I have my analyst joining me this morning as well. It's Mr. C and Chibuzor. Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Zibby.
morning, Zibby. Good morning, Lagos.
All right, welcome. As always, we love to read your messages, so let us know what your thoughts are. The WhatsApp number is 0809 440 981. And you could also tweet at Smooth981. We're streaming the show live on YouTube. Just search for us on YouTube, Smooth981. Okay, so our first story comes from this day. Now, INEC has admitted that issues of logistics, election technology, the behavior of some election personnel at different levels, and the attitude of certain party agents and supporters added to the extremely challenging environment on the 25th of February when the presidential and National Assembly elections held.
Thank you, Zibby. So, the election was elected in the state presidential election yesterday, and he gets all of these things. Now, looking at it, I think it's a issue from INEC. They're owning up to the fact that the election they supposed to call. Now, I say this because some people will say that foreign nations have already started. However, it's up to make that, to the best of my knowledge, one of the other presidential candidates has congratulated the president to declare president. In fact, two of them are now petitions and been granted access to view and inspect the INEC electoral materials. Now, the INEC chairman then further went on to say that for the coming election on Saturday, that if there are any other issues with logistics, the state recs, that is the state resident electoral commissioners, will be held responsible. Now that is fantastic going forward. But who's going to be held accountable for the logistics nightmare that happened on the 25th of February? Someone has to be held responsible for each state, and the buck, I guess, stops on the table of the state resident electoral commissioner. He then goes on further to say that the electoral officials who are found to have contributed to this process through a negative act will be subject to disciplinary action, which is without prejudice to the rights of the political parties, to exercise the legal options. So here we are. He still maintains that BVAS will be used for accreditation and the upload of voter results. And we do hope that the 11th of March will be completely different from the experience of Nigerians on the 25th of February. On the 25th of February, we will be dealt with numerous incidents of polling unit officers, presiding officers being unable to transmit election results to the INEC elections portal. In some cases, we heard that they were not giving the login details and some ridiculous explanations. So it's incumbent upon INEC to first of all redeem itself with this coming election. Now we know that for Saturday, there will be elections in only 28 states because 8 states have elections off cycle. Now, INEC needs to sort out the logistics right now, and they've also condemned the activities of some party agents and their supporters. How they intend to nip this in the bud going forward, only time will tell. But three things INEC must critically get right for this coming election. The logistics have to be in point. And the INEC chairman said for this election, it is the electoral officers for each polling unit that sort out the logistics, that it should no longer be centrally coordinated because they realized or discovered that for the 25th of February election, some of the logistics was centrally planned and there was a failure at that level. So they need to sort out logistics. They need to sort out the machines, make sure the machines are working and that spares are readily available. So they need to also ensure that election results can be uploaded immediately at the polling unit. Then finally, they need to stop this nonsense about using text, alterations, cancellations, and all of that. If there's no intent to deliberately misrepresent the votes that were cast, there should be no reason for cancellations and alterations on a large scale. You can't rule it out completely, but it should be the exception, not the rule. So INEC needs to ensure pre-election logistics on point. Election proper, the officials get there on time, we have all the materials, the beavers machines are working, and post-election, results are declared, results are transmitted, and at the collation center, there's no nonsense, no funny magic going on, no funny tricks, so that they can begin to redeem their image. Sadly, the election on 25th of February has gone, and we have now saddled the aspirants with the onerous task of proving that they won the elections. But let's see what happens on Saturday, the 11th of March.
All right. Well, let us know what your thoughts are. The WhatsApp number is 0809 4440981, and you can also tweet at Smooth981. Supreme Court ruling on the old naira notes. Now, a wave of relief, and this is from The Nation, did sweep across the country, at least in some areas, and for a few, after the Supreme Court extended the validity of the old 200, 500, and 1,000 naira notes to 31st of December 2023. Now, the Supreme Court did not only fault the procedure adopted by the federal government in introducing and implementing the cashless/naira swap policy, it also raised objections to the government's failure to obey the February 8th interim injunction that ordered that the old notes be regarded as legal tender up until the conclusion of the lawsuit, which was filed by 16 state governments.
So so I can obviously hear a deep sigh of relief across the country, and people are rejoicing, and a lot of people are happy that at least now they can get to spend some of the money they have. For me, the major challenge is that obviously CBN has swept away some of this cash and withdrawn them from circulation. So it still remains to be seen if they will be available. And also, one of the things raised in the write-up obviously was also about the fact that CBN is yet to respond to this ruling. So, but to start off, let's dial a bit back. The Supreme Court's judgment is based on Section 23 of the CBN Act. And one of the things that he emphasized on or raised things was on the fact that the CBN did not give due reasonable notice. Now, reading through the article is a bit, they raised that the central bank's governor's press statement was not sufficient notice, but I'm still unclear on how or what was expected of the central bank governor, because I don't think even the act in itself is specific about how the central bank governor should give notice on this instance, on this kind of issue. Within the Section 23 that they've held on to, it's a bit clear on how this should proceed. The central bank governor, as directed by the president, which has happened in this case, has the right to do what he has done, which is, withdraw currency and release currency into it. The other part that they've also held on to from that same section is about the fact that the currency should be redeemable on demand, and there are no timelines placed on that. So while you can withdraw the currency, if anybody walks in with that specific amount of money, they should be able to withdraw it, which I think is in itself makes some sense. What I am a bit unclear of, and I think I am a bit concerned, is that about the Supreme Court ruling is how they've also, in the ruling also, there are some comments about how the president should engage the states in the spirit of true federalism. I agree that yes, because we're a federation, at least officially we're a federation, there should be some level of dialogue and involvement between the federal government and its constituent states and units before such a decision should be taken. But I'm not sure that it is mandated how that dialogue should be taken. And it's good to have this kind of rulings because it also allows us to have those very cogent discussions we need to be about the structure of our current state. I think for me, one of the things that we need to look back at some point, and people need to look back at, is the entire structure of the CBN Act and how independent is the CBN given carry out their functions, given some of the provisions that are contained within the Act. How do we? A lot of, from what I can see, and I'm not, I will apologize, I'm not a learned fellow. Like I think Mr. C here is that a lot of these are subject to interpretation, and depending on the day and who is moving this, it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court as of today this is where they are putting their feet on. So yes, congratulations to the winners. The court also raised objections about that the president did not act on their previous ruling. I recall last week, Mr. C clearly stated the president basically waited for this to run, for the time of the interim junction to run out. So let's see how this happens going into the new week. Let's see what shape it takes, and I hope that at some point, things get back to a bit of normalcy. But in my last comment about this, if the CBN wants to continue with its cashless process program, they need to look at this as the start of a journey and not the end of it. Let's go back, look at the cashless journey, look at what has been achieved by withdrawing some of these monies from circulation, and get everybody who is part of this, who are part of this value chain involved in this process, and set both timely milestones and realistic milestones for achievement of these goals. Once we start it, we'll get there. Thank you.
Okay. Chibuzor, you said congratulations to the winners, but in this situation, it's really hard to tell who a winner is. A lot of businesses are not accepting these old notes. Reuters had a bit of a social experiment. They were not accepted at restaurants, at the airports. I mean, he listed 5 different industries where the old notes were rejected. So really, who's winning?
So when I say winning, obviously the guys who took the case to court, some of the, I think the truth is that we need to start looking past Lagos as our barometer for measuring Nigeria. Other parts of the country, I know in Kaduna State, where the governor had repeatedly given them reassurances that the currencies will still be in use, either after the Supreme Court judgment, or when his party candidate comes to power, that all these things will be reversed. In states like that, and I mean a huge part of the north, those amounts of monies are still in circulation. Obviously, in Lagos, one of the things that we have challenges with Lagos is trying to reverse things like this when they're already put into motion. But in truth, all these entities and all these enterprises are under the legal jurisdiction of the federal government of Nigeria. So in reality, what we need to start doing is holding also some of these businesses accountable. If the law says, and we are still waiting for CBN to come in and make a statement on this, but if the law says that this is acceptable within Nigeria, then it should be acceptable and legal tender. Any business that does otherwise, in reality, is going outside its limits, in my opinion. And I only stand to be corrected by my betters legally, but that's what I believe.
So he's actually correct. So if money is legal tender, every business operating within that country is legally required, except that legal tender is presented in the form of payment. So I hear everything he said, but the reality is there's still some confusion regarding this whole sequence of events. Now, we're not sure whether CBN is going to abide by that law, because even though the Supreme Court dismissed the preliminary objection of the federal government to the effect that the CBN was not a party or was not a necessary party before it, the reality is this: the CBN has mopped up a lot of those notes. What are the chances that they will reject those notes back into the money circulation system? Now, if those notes are not reinjected back in, what then is the outcome? Now, we have some people who still have the old notes, especially the 500 and 1,000 denominations. Will they be accepted? And 2, from a legal perspective, some lawyers have a different perspective as to what the Supreme Court ruled on, and believe that the Supreme Court gave an order it cannot enforce. Now, one of the basic rules or the basic tenets in law is that a court should not give an order it cannot enforce. So let's see how this plays out.
All right, let's look at a few messages coming through. Dele says, Good morning. There are irregularities in major parts of the country, just that they are not reported. There have been reports from certain areas of the country that at a polling unit, INEC officials signed multiple materials. Okay, a lot of speculation across. And let's go on to this message from Gab. Gab says, there should be no reason for cancellations on the report forms. Should there be necessary signatures? Should there be necessary signatures should be appended before reports can be adopted, or a new sheet should be filled while attaching the faulty one. And Abbas says, we hope all the lawyers that said it was wrong for the government to take the federal government to court will accept this judgment in good faith. The people are suffering this poorly implemented policy. Now that we have all seen it was political, let them roll out the money to ease our pains. And Emeka from Bagada says Supreme Court doesn't have the jurisdiction in the act. It's so this in effort is futility. You should tell the Supreme Court about your interest rate and foreign exchange monetary policy. It won't stand. Let's take a quick break. We'll continue the conversation in just a little over a minute. This is Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. Hello, everybody. I'm coming to support.
Yeah, I don't know why Mr. keeps drifting off back and in and out for me.
I think there's a problem.
Is that cable? Is it properly fixed? You're sure it's not loose?
I think it's this. I think the problem.
We'll try mic 3 then. Well, I mean, if they feel like they the Donald never congratulated Joe Biden. Donald Trump. You're listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. It's Zibby here, and our analyst this morning, Mr. C and Chibuzor. We're moving on to a story coming from Premium Times. Now, 7 state governments under the control of the PDP have discontinued their suit seeking a review of the results of the 25th February elections by the Supreme Court. Now, these state governments, Adamawa, Akwa Ibom, Bayelsa, Delta, Edo, Taraba, and Sokoto, had sued the federal government at the Supreme Court over the 2023 presidential and National Assembly elections.
Okay, so very, very quickly. So 7 PDP state governments filed a suit sometime last week before the results were returned, and seeking a review of the elections that took place on the 25th of February. And the elections that there was a substantial non-compliance with the electoral act and wanted the elections cancelled and fresh voting ordered. However, before the suit could be heard, INEC then subsequently declared the results, and they forced to withdraw this case because now the results have been declared. Only the proper forum for challenging the election and the declaration of the results is at the election tribunal. So there's nothing at stake here. There's nothing amiss here. We've done the proper thing, and it's instructive to note that both the Labour Party and the PDP have filed the electoral petitions before the election petition tribunal, and they've been granted orders to inspect the INEC materials. So we expect that at the hearing of the election petitions, these issues that were sought to be raised, especially by the PDP state governments, will be raised in the PDP petition. And then the courts will have to give it a decision one way or the other. So the court will hear evidence from the petitioners, will hear evidence from the first respondent, in this case, that is Mr. Tinubu, and will also hear evidence from INEC, and then come to the final decision on the matter. Now, if the tribunal does find that there's a substantial non-compliance with the Electoral Act, it's then up to the tribunal to make the necessary orders, and then we'll wait and see.
All right, let's go on to some messages that we have coming through. Fabian from Ekbe says, it's been 3 days since the Supreme Court ruling and enough time for CBN and all the presidents to have spoken to clear the air on the matter. Without this, most people will not want to carry the burden of old notes on their heads. And let's see. Lukman says, it's not easy. It's not to inject back. It's to accept what is out there. Let's move on to our next story. And this one comes from Punch. The NLC has threatened to shut down the country's seaports over the government's refusal to address some of the challenges in the sector. Now, the president of the NLC said this on Friday while addressing journalists in Apapa during a courtesy visit to the president of the Maritime Workers Union of Nigeria. And he's given the federal government a 2-week ultimatum to review workers' salaries and address the challenges that the sector is facing.
So basically what is happening is that Mr. Gero is asking Mr. Gero, obviously, who is in charge of the general term, the trade unions, is asking that the head of the Maritime Workers Union should get back to him in a certain period of time to indicate that they want to proceed with on the industrial actions against the concessions of, basically against the concessionaries of the port. The major crux, obviously, is on salaries and wages, and they've been requesting for an increase in their salaries and wages. The challenge here for me is to start with, is that who are they directing? They're currently directing this industrial action towards the government. As stated, the government, the ports have been concessioned out to various private entities, and in three instances, if we're asking who are the employers of these workers, are not the government, but to my understanding, are not the government, but these various private individuals or private organizations. But what they're asking, or they're placing pressure on the government for actually to come in and basically sort this out. Well, in reality, obviously, if we can talk about this as being, that the direction of the industrial action of whoever they are speaking to at this point might be misdirected, that they should be speaking to their employers. But unfortunately, whatever action that they take would have a negative impact on the ports and basically commerce in Nigeria today, because what would typically happen is when they go on this strike, they would have issues clearing stuff off the ports, bringing things in, basically upsetting the supply chain affecting various industries and manufacturers, as they will not be able to receive their products or their goods coming via the ports on time. And obviously, it will create a backlog, which would not only come into effect now, but obviously affect future transactions within the port. So, for the sake of everybody, and obviously for the fact that we are going through crucial times as a country where every dime we can get in is useful, they have some edge to be able to demanding for what they are demanding for now. But I think so. In this instance, yes, the minister should step in, the Minister for Trade should step in, the federal government should try and step in. But what we need to be careful about is placing a precedent for this kind of actions going forward. Whatever role the ministry plays in this instance should be to mediate between the workers, the unions, and the concessionaires, and they can't step outside our limits, because, like I said, if once we create this precedent, what we'll have is a rollerball effect across all sectors, even the sectors that we've handed over to private entities. And the truth is that concessioning out functions or privatizing or handing them out to private entities is something that will keep continuing in Nigeria as we speak today. All the presidential candidates spoke about that in their campaigns, and we expect to see more of that. So we need to be a bit careful how we treat these types of labor disputes, ensuring that both sides get a fair hearing and they get a fair resolution that at least works for the time being, at least for both parties.
All right, let's take a few messages. Shegun says, if the CBN prints enough new notes, the clamor for old notes will go down. And let's see, this one is from Abbas. He says, we hope Mr. Ejairo will not shut down the whole country like he did to our transmission company some months ago. Must NLC always be rebellious in getting things resolved? There should be proper channels of mediation instead of threats to shut down facilities. Okay, let's move on to the next story. And this comes from The Guardian. Suspected Boko Haram terrorists have abducted 7 people from Ngama community in Magumeri in Borno State. Now, this abduction follows the terrorist storming of Ngama on the 2nd of March in northwestern parts of the local council. 4 women and 3 men are believed to have been abducted by the suspected Boko Haram terrorists.
Okay, so very, very quickly, there has been some infighting recently between Boko Haram and Israel. Now, our thoughts continue to go to the families of we want to believe and we trust that the security agencies will still be with them for reference. Now, so what has been happening is Israel has been trying to decimate Boko Haram terrorists and their strongholds in the northeastern corridor of Nigeria. And to some extent, they've been very successful. Now, as a result, Boko Haram is unable to operate, and as a result, they do not have cash, and they're unable to buy the basic foodstuffs to survive. So what do? They resort to criminality, they resort to kidnapping. And this is one of the outcomes of the sustained Israel onslaught on Boko Haram soldiers and their outposts. Now, it is regrettable that we're still having to deal with issues like this, but it speaks to a larger issue. If Israel is decimating Boko Haram, that means Israel has gotten stronger. Now, what is the response of the Nigerian security forces to this developing trend? And it's not just in one isolated location, it's gaining strength throughout the northeastern corridor. Now, when Israel is able to establish a firm foothold in the northeastern corridor of Nigeria, it begs the question, will they then decide to move to other parts of Nigeria? Why are we waiting? Why are we seemingly waiting for them to gain a stronghold? Why don't we take the fight to them? Why don't we attack them, be on the front foot? Why are we not? Why are we always reactionary? So these are very disturbing times, and it's instructive to know that on the 29th of May, we will have a new president. What does the new president intend to do with regards to these things? Because we cannot continue to be disturbed and be harassed by these guys. Already the activities affect and let's hope that someone in the government, someone in the security forces is listening, someone is paying attention, and let's also hope that they're taking the right steps already to get this thing going.
All right, we're out of time, but I'll take one more comment, and this one is from Joseph. Joseph says, why is it that the president and the CBN are playing God and adamant to obey the Supreme Court judgments, just deafening silence from the powers that be? My little advice is that these seeds of disobedience to court judgments would one day become a norm, that no citizens would obey it. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for your messages. And of course, thanks to my analysts, Mr. C and Chibuzor, for joining us this morning. Do stay with us. There is a lot more to come. Smooth breakfast.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Chibuzor.
Thanks, Zibby. Have fun.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.